Hi guys, welcome back to Pro Studio Live and welcome to the Pro Tools Authority class. Last week, we finished talking about the details of and different ways to import audio, and we also discussed importing video. We then started talking about MIDI with some basics on what MIDI is and how it works, with discussions of tick-based versus sample-based timing, and MIDI versus instrument tracks. We left off discussing working with MIDI with an intro to the different time scales that are commonly used in conjunction with MIDI data. So today, we will continue along those lines and cover working with MIDI in more detail. We will continue discussing different timescales and rulers in regards to MIDI, including things like setting key signatures, meter, and tempo. We'll also cover recording MIDI, including what you have to do to prepare to record MIDI with some basics of MIDI routing, setting up your MIDI recording, and possibly even recording MIDI. We will probably even get into using virtual instruments, which will include details on the virtual instruments that come free with Pro Tools, which are Expand 2, Boom, and Structure free. So let's get straight into it. We talked about displaying bars and beats properly last time, but some other common time scales that you'll want to be aware of for MIDI include tempo, meter, and key signature. You can not only set or change the default tempo, key signature, and meter with their corresponding rulers, but you can also make automated changes in tempo, meter, and key signature throughout your session with these rulers. So, just like other rulers, you could display the tempo, meter, or key signature rulers in a few different ways. One way is to go to your View menu, select Rulers, and then select the ruler you want to display. So in this case, either tempo, meter, or key signature. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. I'm going to go to that View menu. I'm going to go to Rulers. And then I already have tempo here and meter, so I'm going to display key signature. If we go back over here, you'll see that the key signature ruler is here. Okay. So another way to do this is to use that ruler view selector drop-down menu that you should all be fairly familiar with by now. I'm just going to make sure I have meter, tempo, and key signature rulers displayed here for the purpose of this class. So I'll show you that drop-down menu. And we already checked, but we have tempo, meter, and key signature right there, checked off. So you would just click on it if it wasn't checked off, right? So once we have our rulers displayed how we want them, we can set the defaults for these values. It's important to check your default meter, tempo, and key signature before you even begin recording MIDI data. So you start out on the right foot, right? So let's talk about your Pro Tools sessions meter and how to set it. Your default meter in Pro Tools is 4/4, which is generally considered to be the most common meter in music. If you're using a click and setting different accented versus unaccented beats, then it can be very important to set your meter correctly. So your default meter and any meter changes that you make throughout your session will be displayed on your meter ruler. So to set your meter, just make sure your meter ruler is displayed in the ruler view section of your edit window, and then click on what is called the Add Meter Change button. So this is the small plus sign to the right of where it says meter on the meter ruler. So I'm just going to click that really quickly. So I'm going to find the meter ruler here, and I'm just going to click this little plus sign. So this will open up the meter change dialog box. In this dialog box, all you have to do is pick your options and then click OK. You'll notice that the default for the location value is wherever your edit cursor is located. So just enter the meter that you want to use for your session here. If you want the meter change to occur somewhere other than where your edit cursor is located, then enter that location in your location field. So for example, to set the meter change for the beginning of your session, you can enter 1, 1, and then 3 zeros for first bar, first beat, and 0 ticks. Also, you can set your new meter. So for example, you can set the meter to 3/4, which is another common meter in music that consists of 3 beats per bar as opposed to 4, with a quarter note being the beat value. You can then also set the click timing value by clicking on the little note icon on the bottom next to where it says click. So that'll be this little note right here. You can click on it and you have a bunch of different options here. So if you entered 1, 1, and then 3 zeros for the location value, then when you click OK, the new meter event will be created at the beginning of your session, replacing your default meter. So I'm just going to do that really quickly so you can see. So see my initial meter here is 4/4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to 3/4 so you can see the difference. And then I'm going to enter 1, and then it fills it in 1, 1, and then 3 zeros. So that looks right. And what I'm going to just do is I'm going to hit OK, and you're going to see this change to 3/4 right here at the beginning. So there you go, 3/4. So otherwise, it will place a meter change at the location you specified. So for example, if I change my edit cursor here, and then I hit that plus button, I can change it. Let's see, I have a meter change right here to 4/4, so I'm going to again change it to 3/4. So there's a change going on. And see the location is set to where my edit cursor is. I'm just going to hit OK. And there we go. It's set to right where my edit cursor is located. So another way to open up this dialog is to click on the numbers signifying the meter within the current meter display in the transport window. The controls for which, if you remember, is either in the toolbar on the top right of your session, or it's in its own freestanding window. So just double click on the numbers next to where it says meter. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. Let's see. So here's meter. You can double click on that and it pulls up the same dialog for you. So you can also open this dialog by double clicking on any meter change or where it says the initial meter within the meter ruler, and you just double click on that little yellow arrows to do that. So I'm just going to close out of this so I can show you guys really quickly. So for example, this meter change, when I hover over the little yellow arrow here, my cursor changes. And then there you go. Just double click on it, opens up the meter change box. Same with the first one. There you go. So let's talk about changing and setting the session tempo. Your default session tempo is 120 beats per minute, which could also be worded 120 BPM, right? It's especially important to change the session tempo if you're planning on using the click. So you can set the tempo for the session by creating a tempo event at the very beginning of your session. You can then create tempo changes by placing more tempo events throughout the session. You'll be able to see these tempo events on the tempo ruler, just like the meter ruler. You can see meter events, right? So to set your session tempo, you'll first want to make sure your tempo ruler is displayed. And I believe I have that displayed right now. So I'm just going to hit cancel to get out of this meter change dialog box. So then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure your tempo ruler enable option is selected by clicking on the conductor button on your toolbar. And that's really important to do. So I'm just going to find my conductor button right here. See how it looks like a little conductor? And I'm going to click on it. So then what you're going to do is you're just going to click on the add tempo change button, which is the small plus sign to the right of where it says tempo on your tempo ruler. And so that's just like with the meter ruler. So I'm going to just click on that again. So it's this little plus sign. And it just pops up your tempo change dialog box. So the tempo change dialog will open up, and you just have to make sure that the value for the location is correct. And then you're going to enter your new tempo in the BPM field, which again means beats per minute, right? So let's see, what am I? I'm on 128 in this session. So I'm going to make it 120 just to see the change. And again, if you want to set the tempo for the whole session, you'll want to make sure that this tempo event is at the beginning of the session. So in bars and beats, that would mean that you would enter a 1 followed by another 1 and then 3 zeros in the location field. So then just make sure you are either okay with the beat being based on the default quarter note where it says resolution right here, or click on the note to change it to another note value. So I can just show you the open drop down menu here that opens up. So when you're done, you just hit OK to create that new tempo event. So I'm just going to hit OK, and you'll see the new tempo event become created. So let's see, what am I at? I have 120. So we're going to see 120 pop up. And there you go, right there. So you can also open up this dialog by double clicking on an existing tempo event, just like we did with meter events, right? So you can just really quickly hover over the little arrow, and it opens up that tempo change dialog box if you double click on it. And again, you can do that with the beginning, and it just opens right up. So another thing you can do is you can tap the tempo into your session. So to do this, select the BPM value in your tempo change dialog box, and then hit the T key on your keyboard to the beat of the music. And you'll see the tempo value change as you change the speed at which you tap. So I'm going to tap kind of irregularly so you can see that tempo change a lot. But I'm just going to hit the T key here. So, and then I have to try to go more regularly, huh? And then if I speed it up, you'll see that number climb. So this is great for if your musicians don't know their exact tempo and you want to get as close as possible to how they're currently playing the music. So you'll often find, though, that you'll get a close but approximate value for the tempo this way, and you might have to tweak it as the musician settles in. Now, Pro Tools automatically maps its behavior to follow any tempo events that are in your tempo ruler, which is also known as your session tempo map. But you can turn this tempo map on and off if you want. This is through the tempo ruler enable button, which is also known as the conductor button that's in your toolbar. So to use your tempo map, just make sure that that conductor or tempo ruler enable button is activated. And right now I have it activated from earlier. And remember, this button is available in the transport window or in the transport section of the toolbar in your edit window. So it's both available in your toolbar section here, and if you're not seeing it in your session, you can click on this drop-down menu to find it, and you just select the transport section here. Or you can go to Window and Transport, and it's available within that as well. And if you're not seeing it here in your transport window, you can click the drop-down for the transport window as well. Okay. So anyway, in contrast to this tempo map mode, you can also place your session into manual tempo mode. When you're in manual tempo mode, Pro Tools will completely ignore any tempo events that are on your tempo map, which is in the tempo ruler, right? So to shift into this mode, you just click on that tempo ruler enable, which is also called the conductor button, until it's deselected. You can tell it's deselected because the button won't be highlighted in blue. So I'm just going to click that really quickly to show you. And you'll actually see my MIDI shift again because it's tick-based, right? We talked about that in the last episode. See how it shifted. So when you're in this mode, you can change the tempo manually using that current tempo field in your transport window or in that transport section of your edit window toolbar. So just click on the current tempo number to highlight the field and then type to change the tempo. So let's find that tempo section right here. So I can click in here. I can just type. So I can make it 140. I can make it whatever I want. So you can also tap in the tempo in this mode using the T key on your keyboard or a MIDI controller. So you just click on that tempo field and then tap your tempo. So just like I did earlier, I can hit the T key and it will change the tempo. And you can see that number changing. Well, now I have to slow down or something so the number changes. So the number will change as you tap the tempo. However, if you try to change the tempo during playback, you'll notice that playback will be temporarily interrupted when you actually change the tempo. Okay, so let's talk about setting your session's key signature. your default key signature in Pro Tools is C major. Just like with tempo and meter, it's important to set the key signature for your session if you know the key signature and you plan to use it. Also, just like with tempo and meter, you can easily set a key signature event at the beginning of your session, and that will set the key signature for your whole session, unless you make another event later in the session to change the key signature. You can also make key change events at any point in your session. So you can view any key change events within your session using that key signature ruler. So let's just make sure that that ruler is displayed using our ruler drop-down menu. And it looks like I have it displayed here. But again, that drop-down menu is available right up here. If you want to use it, you can take away the key signature ruler and then you can add it back in. So then you just click the Add Key Signature button, which is the small plus sign to the right of where it says Key on your key signature ruler. So this, again, is very similar to our other rulers that we've covered so far. So I'm going to go to the Key Signature ruler. I'm just going to click that little plus sign. And it opens up your dialog box. So this opens up what's called your Key Change dialog box. And here you can select your key, pick whether it's major or minor, and type in the location for the key change event. And just like with meter and tempo events, you can enter 1 and then another 1 and then 3 zeros for the location value where it says from to place the event at the beginning of your session, overriding the default key. And that's as long as your main time scale is in bars and beats, right? So I'm just going to do that again so you can see that replacing it. So 110. Then you just click OK to set your key change event. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to change it away from that default C major. So if you look here, we have the default C major is what's currently in our session. So I'm going to change it to F major. I'm going to hit OK, and you're going to see this change to F major, because I put it at the beginning of the session, right? So there you go, and it changes. So now that you've configured the key signature, the tempo, and the meter, and you've made some MIDI compatible tracks from earlier, from our last class, you can prepare to record some MIDI. So first we want to make sure your MIDI device and software is ready to record. So to do that, you'll first want to connect a MIDI device. Then you want to check your inputs and outputs on your tracks in Pro Tools. And then you'll need to record enable the tracks and set any record options before recording. So let's talk about connecting a MIDI device first. When you record MIDI, you usually need to hook up some sort of MIDI device to your computer to serve as an input for your recording. So this could be a MIDI keyboard, a drum machine, or just anything that involves MIDI triggers. Anyway, no matter what device you're using, you'll need to make sure that that MIDI device, also known as the MIDI controller, right, is properly connected to your interface or computer. So you can connect your MIDI device to your system using an input on your MIDI interface or your computer's USB port, depending on your configuration. So you might also need to use a MIDI output on your interface in order to send a return back from your interface and system back to your MIDI device. Or you might need to use an output to send a return from your computer and interface that goes out to another MIDI device besides the first MIDI device, right? So, for example, another MIDI device in this instance might be a synthesizer that you'll use for playback and monitoring. So, for example, you could use a MIDI cable to connect the MIDI out port on your MIDI keyboard to the MIDI in port on your M box or whatever interface you have. And you could then make that return for playback and monitoring by connecting the MIDI out port from your M box or other interface to the MIDI in port on your keyboard, if your keyboard has sound capabilities built into it. Or to similarly set up a return for playback and monitoring purposes, you can connect that MIDI out port on your M box or interface to the MIDI in port on another unit that creates sound from MIDI, like a synthesizer. So you can also connect some MIDI devices to your computer and subsequently Pro Tools using a USB cable, which is what I've done here. If you have a MIDI device capable of this and you plug it in this way, then it's good to know that the USB cable will provide you with both MIDI input and MIDI output for your MIDI device. Okay, so now let's talk about checking those MIDI inputs and outputs once you have your device or devices hooked up. You'll have to check the inputs and outputs, also called I/O regularly in Pro Tools, of your MIDI compatible track or tracks once you have your device or devices plugged in. You'll have to make sure those tracks have the correct inputs and outputs and are basically configured correctly so that you can route your MIDI signals into and also out of your tracks. So first of all, your MIDI input. Each of your MIDI compatible tracks will have a MIDI input selector. Using this selector, you will tell Pro Tools which incoming MIDI data can be recorded onto that specific MIDI compatible track in Pro Tools. However, this selector is in a different location depending on if you're looking at a MIDI or an instrument track. Now, on a MIDI track, this input selector is in the same spot as the audio input path selector on an audio track. And that's partially because the MIDI input selector on either a MIDI or instrument track are the MIDI equivalent of that audio input path selector option. So you can find this MIDI input selector in your mix or in your edit window. So you can either find it in your mix window with the I/O section of your channel strip, which I can show you really quickly here. So I'm just going to Command equals to switch over to your mix window. I'm going to find my MIDI track. So I have a MIDI track in here. So here's that selector. It's this one right here. Or you can display it in your edit window if it's not displayed already by using the pop-up menu for your tracks area and selecting the I/O option to display the I/O view. So I'm just going to switch back to my edit window by Command equals. I'm going to find that MIDI track and I'm going to find that drop-down menu. I'm just going to click on that drop-down menu and I'm going to make sure I/O is selected. So right now it's selected, so it's displayed. And here's that input path selector that we're talking about. It's right here. However, instrument tracks are a bit more tricky. So you'll actually find the MIDI input selector in the instrument view of an instrument track. It's a separate thing that you need to display, and it's separate from the I/O view. And this section is only used for instrument tracks. So to display the instrument view, you can go to your view menu and then select mix window and then select instruments. So I'm going to switch to the mix window really quickly. And then I'm going to go view. Let's see. I'm on it, aren't I? Mix window views, yes. And then I'm going to select, oh my gosh, I'm losing it here. I'm going to, jeez. I'm going to select instruments here. Okay, so after my mouse skips over everything, we're all good. So I have instruments displayed here in my mix window, and you can see that right here on my instrument tracks. I have that view available right here. So if I click on this, it'll hide that, and then I can bring it back. View, mix window views, and then instruments. Okay. So this will make that instrument view section with your instrument MIDI controls appear in your mix window at the top of your channel strip, right? Or another way to display them is you can go to your view menu and then select edit window and then select instruments. And this will make that instrument view section with your instrument MIDI controls appear towards the head of your track display area in your edit window. So let's see if I have that displayed already. I'm just going to switch to the edit window. And here we have it displayed already, right here. So that's where it'll display or where it'll disappear from if you toggle that option on and off. So now, by default, these MIDI input selectors should be set to all. And this means that all of the MIDI signals coming from your device or devices are sent to your track. But you can have more control over what MIDI data is sent to your MIDI compatible track. You can use the MIDI input selector to change the MIDI input to something more specific, like the specific device, which would be called a port, and channel. We will go into more specific details on MIDI routing in a later course, though. For now, I want to get you guys into recording MIDI, so let's move on to the MIDI output. So you can set the MIDI output using the MIDI output selector on any MIDI compatible track. This output selector lets you decide which port or device is being used for playback and monitoring purposes in regards to MIDI data. So this means that you can route your live MIDI data out to an audio sound source, which can be used for playback and monitoring purposes if you have the MIDI through option enabled. So you can find the MIDI through option in the options menu in Pro Tools. Just make sure that it's checked off to make sure it's enabled. So I can just show you that really quickly. It's this options menu at the top. And then you just want to make sure that MIDI through is checked, which I have right now. Now, when you're using MIDI through, it's good to know that you might want to disable local control on your actual MIDI keyboard or MIDI controller. This is because you might otherwise find that your keyboard might receive double notes, which will cause stuck notes. Anyway, in a similar fashion, you can not only route live MIDI data to an audio source for playback and monitoring, but you can also route recorded MIDI data to an audio source for monitoring. So just use the MIDI output selector to select the port or device and the MIDI channel that you want to route out to. Similarly to the MIDI input selector, you can find the MIDI output selector on a MIDI track in the same spot as the audio output path selector on an audio track. So I can show you that really quickly. I'm just going to switch over to my mix window here and find my MIDI track, and here's your output selector right here. So, however, on instrument tracks, the MIDI output selector is located in your instrument view section within your mix or edit windows, just like the input selector, right? So, again, if we look to that instrument view section, you can see the output selector right here. So right now I have this one set to expand too. So you can set the MIDI output just by clicking on the MIDI output selector in either the edit or mix window, and you select the port and channel or instrument that you want to route out to for MIDI playback and monitoring. So right now I have this instrument track sent to expand to, but I could also pick options like on my MIDI keyboard here. If I had something else plugged in, I could pick those options. But right now, I'm going to keep it on expand to because that's an instrument within Pro Tools that we're going to cover soon. So next, you'll want to record enable any MIDI compatible tracks that you want to record to. So this should be pretty easy for you to do since we already learned how to record enable audio tracks. And the way you record enable an audio track is the same as the process for record enabling a MIDI or instrument track. All you have to do is click the record enable button for the track that you want to record to. So you can find this record enable button in either the edit or the mix window, right? So I can just show you that really quickly. So we have my instrument track here, and here's my record enable button. And then if I switch over to my edit window, I can find that same track, and here's the record enable button. So the button will begin to flash red when the track is record enabled. And so I'm just going to click mine to record enable mine again. And now that your track is record enabled, there are just a few record options that you'll want to check and set before you start to record. So with Pro Tools, you have a bunch of recording options that are specific to MIDI data. You'll want to look at and possibly change the input quantize, the MIDI controls, and the MIDI controls options before you even begin to record. So input quantize is a feature that helps you automatically quantize or line up the recorded MIDI notes to your timing grid. So this makes your recording sound similar in style to what you would get working with like a drum machine or a sequencer, but it takes out some of that human element and feel to the rhythm of the piece. So just make your decision with that in mind. a lot of people don't want to make it sound too robotic, so they won't quantize it as much. So once you've decided whether to use input quantize or not, you can enable input quantize by going to your event menu, selecting event operations, and then selecting input quantize. And you should notice that quantize and input quantize are two separate options on this menu. So anyway, we're going to go to event menu, event operations, input quantize, right? So I'll just show you that really quickly. Event menu, event operations, and I'm going to skip over quantize. I'm going to go to input quantize here. So this will open up your event operations window with input quantize selected on that top drop-down menu, which is right up here, input quantize. From here, you just click on the enable input quantize checkbox to check it off and enable input quantize. So I'm just going to make sure mine's checked, and it is right here, enable input quantize. Then you should select your options for what to quantize. So you can choose to quantize the attacks of your notes with your note on option, which will line up note start points to your nearest grid value. Or you can choose the less common option of quantizing the releases of your notes with your note off option, which will line up the note endpoints to your nearest grid value. So you should then decide whether to select your preserve note duration option, which will preserve the duration of your notes by shifting the endpoints of your notes in tandem with any shifts in the start points of your notes. If you don't select this option, then the end and the start points of notes can be shifted independently, and your note durations may not remain the same as they were in the performance. So next, you'll want to set your quantize grid options. So the trick here is to set this value to the smallest or shortest note value that will be performed. So this is because Pro Tools will align any notes in your performance to your nearest grid value. So once you've done that, you should look at the options section of this event operations window. Here, you can select and set values for any of the options that you see. We will go into more detail on these options later, but as a general rule, they basically allow you to keep some of the human element of the performance in one way or another, and to varying degrees, depending on how you set them. So the other type of recording options that you'll want to set before recording to MIDI compatible tracks is that of MIDI controls. So before you start setting MIDI controls, you'll want to make sure that you can see them. You can set it up so that the transport window and or the edit window are displaying your MIDI controls. So to view your MIDI controls within the transport window, first open up the transport window by going to your window menu and then selecting transport, or by holding the command button and then hitting the one key on a numerical keypad. So I'm just going to close out of this window. I'm going to window and transport because I don't have a numerical keypad here, and it opens up. Then you can display your MIDI controls if they aren't already displayed by going to your view menu and then selecting selecting transport and selecting MIDI controls. So you can go view and then selecting transport and then MIDI controls. So if I click this, it's going to take them away from this transport window. So you can take them away, you can go back, and you can put them back. MIDI controls. Cool. You can also use the drop-down menu in the transport window to display or hide your MIDI controls. And we've covered this before, but I'll just show you it again. So it's this drop-down menu right here. And you just click on MIDI controls to display or hide it. Right now it's checked off because it's displayed. Or you can also display these same MIDI controls within your edit window in your toolbar, which is my favorite way to see them. So you can do this by selecting MIDI controls from the drop-down menu for your toolbar. So again, I'm just going to close out of this window. And my MIDI controls are already displayed here, but that drop-down menu again is on the right if you need it. So MIDI controls are right here. Now, we already discussed some of these controls in an earlier episode, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on them here, but it will be a good refresher for you if you were here for that earlier episode. So through this MIDI controls section, you can enable wait for note or count off options. So click to highlight the button to the left with the pause icon and the icon that looks like the end of a MIDI cable to enable wait for note. And I can just show you that button. It's this little button right here. So it's like the pause icon. And this is actually like a little cartoon of the end of a MIDI cable. If you can see it, I don't know. So you can click that to enable wait for note. And if this is enabled, then the button will highlight blue and wait for note will cause Pro Tools to automatically begin recording when you start to play on your MIDI performance device. So your count off option is in the text-based section above those buttons. And you can click where it says count off to highlight and enable that option. So I'll just show you that. So I'm going to undo wait for note. And if I click on this, it just highlights it. And that toggles it. So it's that easy. So if it's enabled, count off will count off specific number of measures once you hit record and before your recording actually begins. So as an example, the count off option is good for musicians that want to hear a measure or two of the tempo or beat before the recording actually begins, so that when it does begin, they can jump right in at the correct tempo. And you can also enable a metronome option in this section, which will enable your metronome or click sound. But on a side note, the easiest way to enable your metronome playback is by setting up a click track, which we covered in a previous episode. And remember, the metronome option is enabled by clicking on to highlight in blue the button that looks like an old school metronome to the right of your wait for note button. So again, that button is just right here, this metronome button. So if you enable the metronome, though, you should make sure that you visit the click count off options dialog box to set parameters, which if you were with us in a previous episode, you might remember that this dialog is located by going to your setup menu and then selecting click count off. So I can show you that again really quick. So setup and then click count off. Anyway, so now you can also choose whether to enable MIDI merge. And this option makes it so that if you record one pass of MIDI that you like, you can then record another pass to the same exact track that will be combined with the previous pass. So, for example, you could record just the bass line of a piano part in one pass, and then you could enable MIDI merge, and then you could do another pass for one of the higher parts. And Pro Tools would combine those two passes into one piano part that has both the upper notes and the lower notes for the bass line. Because of this, though, I recommend leaving MIDI merge off until you actually make a first pass that you like and you want to keep. And then you flip MIDI merge on to add to that part. So anyway, to enable MIDI merge, you just click on that MIDI merge button to highlight it in blue. And that button has two arrows that look like they're merging on it. So I can just show you that button again really quickly. It's this button right here. Cool. So just gonna have a little water here. So you should also set the tempo for recording before you begin to record. So you can do this by clicking on the tempo ruler enable button, which is the conductor button, and it's technically called the conductor track, to highlight it in blue and to enable it. So I'm just going to click that to highlight it. And now it's enabled. So this causes Pro Tools to follow the tempo map that you've created in your tempo ruler, right? We covered this previously. Or you can disable that same conductor button to manually set the tempo in your tempo field, which is right above the buttons in the MIDI control section. So I could also disable that and then manually set the tempo up here. Okay, so now that you've set up your MIDI compatible track with correct routing and settings and you've record enabled it, we are ready to discuss what sounds will be mapped to this MIDI data. So let's talk about virtual instruments a little bit. Now, there are other ways to turn MIDI into sounds or music, but in case you don't already own a synth or a sound module, or something similar, in Pro Tools, we have virtual instruments that you can assign to your MIDI data. So virtual instruments are basically the software equivalents of what your outboard gear that creates sound from MIDI can do. So sound modules, synths, that sort of thing. You'll see a lot of virtual instruments, many of them made by third-party developers that are easily used as real-time plugins. And actually, there are a few virtual instruments that come stock with Pro Tools, and they're called Expand 2, Boom, and Structure Free. So you can add this type of virtual instrument plugin to any instrument track or aux track, and they're triggered by any MIDI data that you route through the track that you place them on. So you can place a virtual instrument on an instrument track to easily record MIDI. That's the way that I like to do it. This way you get some live monitoring and you hear what you're recording. So to add a virtual instrument to an instrument track in Pro Tools, just find the instrument track and make sure your inserts are displayed, either in the edit or mix window. So you can do this by going to your view menu and selecting mix window views, or selecting edit window views, depending on where you want to see the inserts, and then selecting inserts A through E or inserts F through J. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. So I'm going to go to my view menu. Let's see, where is it? So I can either go to mix window views and make sure my inserts are showing, or I can go to edit window views and make sure my inserts are showing here. So if I click inserts F through J, since it's not highlighted here, I'll click those and then you can see them pop up here in my edit window. So there it pops up right along here. So let's see. I tend to use inserts A through E first, but you could just as easily use inserts F through J first. They're functionally the same. They're just labeled with letters the way some people would number different inputs. So you can also display your inserts by using the drop-down menus for view options in either the mix or edit windows and selecting those inserts A through E or inserts F through J. So again, here's the drop-down menu for your edit window. I'm going to deselect F through J because I don't really need it right now. And then similarly in your mix window, I can click on this here and I can deselect F through J because I don't really need it right now. And I could also select it to make it reappear, right? So anyway, once you have your inserts displayed, you can click on one of the inserts on your instrument track and simply choose plugin and then choose instrument and then select the specific instrument that you want to use. So I can just show you that really quickly. So I'm going to take away this one so you can see the process. So here's my instrument, my insert section for my instrument track. I'm going to go plugin. Go instrument. I'm going to pick expand 2 again. And there you go. So you'll notice that if the track is a stereo track, then you won't just have the plugin as an option. You'll actually have the option of a multi-channel plugins or multi-mono plugins. So in this instance, you can choose multi-channel plugins to get stereo virtual instruments, or you can choose multi-mono plugins to view mono virtual instruments. Anyway, once you pick your specific virtual instrument using that insert drop-down menu, Pro Tools will automatically route your MIDI output for your track through your virtual instrument plugin. And you'll notice that the instrument's interface will open up so that you can tweak parameters for your instrument. So, excuse me, right here is that interface, right? This window that popped up just now. So you'll also want to make sure that your output for your track is properly selected for playback and monitoring purposes using the audio's output path selector above your track's fader, right? So if you're doing that, I'm not doing that right now because I'm just using the one keyboard. I'm just using the instrument. I'm not going back out to another device or back out to the keyboard. But that's an option if you want to do that. So you might also then want to adjust the fader for your track, either to make it blend in with other audio in your track or to increase or decrease the level, like to your liking for whatever reason. And again, the fader for your track's right here. So I have my fader way up just so you guys can hear it. Excuse me. I'm just going to have a sip of water. All this talking. So now you just check your whole setup by playing some notes on your MIDI controller. And you should see the meters on your instrument track registering the audio output from your virtual instrument. And it's also important to note that if you're working with MIDI, you might need to record and enable the instrument track just like an audio track in order to have your MIDI signals passing through your MIDI controller and through your track. So I'm just going to play a couple notes here, and you'll see the track will register that audio. So, and right now it's just a default sound, so it's not that exciting. But I'm just playing notes on my keyboard, and you see the signal, which is a good sign, right? And we're just going to ignore the fact that this is clipping right now. You wouldn't normally want that to happen. So you'll also be able to see the actual MIDI signal that's routing into your track from your controller within the MIDI meter and your instrument view. So if you're having trouble and you don't see audio, you can look a step backwards in the signal chain, and you can check the MIDI meter in the instrument view. And if you still don't see signal on the meter there, then you should return to what we covered earlier and check that your MIDI output has been assigned properly and that your device is connected properly. So let's talk about some of these virtual instruments before recording our MIDI. So Expand 2 is one of the virtual instruments that comes with Pro Tools. If you're using Pro Tools 11 and you don't have Expand 2 installed, you can find the installers on your Avid account. So you just go to your products and subscriptions and you find the what's called the Air Creative Collection 11, and it'll be on your list of downloads. You just download that and install it. It's also called Air Instruments Bundle 12 if you're using Pro Tools 12, and it's called Avid Virtual Instruments 10 if you're using Pro Tools 10. So anyway, Expand 2 is an Air virtual instrument. It has a lot of patches, which are plugin settings built into it. And in fact, it actually has over 2,300 patches. It also has over 1,200 parts that you can combine, and they define parts as sound presets. So with Expand 2, with the Expand 2 library, you can create things like electric and acoustic piano sounds, organs, strings, percussions, loops, synth pads, leads, brass and woodwinds, and even vocal sounds. So the possibilities are pretty diverse. So the way it works is you have 4 synthesizer slots labeled A through D. So you can see those right here. Here it says A. So here's slot A, slot B, slot C, slot D. And each of these slots has its own MIDI channel, mix modulation, arpeggiator, and effects settings. So you can put one of the preset parts in each slot. And the patch is what you get when you combine slots A through D. It's this layering of parts that makes it possible to have such vibrant, deep, and rich sounds from Expand 2. So to start using Expand 2, you pick an instrument track, click on the insert panel, and select Expand 2 as the instrument you'd like to use. So this will pop open the interface for Expand 2, and you'll see those 4 slots. Again, like I did earlier, right? So like a lot of plugins, it will open in the factory default setting. And it will also open with one part assigned to your slot A, and that's it. And you can choose a bunch of preset patches in Expand 2 from here as well. And they're all organized into folders by type, and they're easy to find and choose. So to select and activate a patch setting, you just click on the librarian menu, which again is where it says factory default. So it's up here. And here are all our folders that we can choose from. There's like a lot of options here. Excuse me. So I'm going to just pick some guitars here. Let's do the ukulele. That sounds like a lot of fun. Oh, it's just one. Well, anyway, sometimes it can open up multiple, right? So you just find the patch that you want by exploring those folders. And You can pick different patches really easily and listen to them and then decide to move on to a different patch. But anyway, you can also toggle the parts on and off easily within Expand 2. So to do that, you just click on the little power icon button, which is above where it says the letter designator for the part. So like A through G. So that's right here for each of the slots. So here's the little power. So I can turn that off and turn it back on. I can turn B off. Right now I don't have anything assigned there, so it's not that exciting, but I could turn it back on if I wanted to. So if the power icon is lit up green, then that part is active or on. But if it's not lit up, then that part is inactive or off. So you can choose the setting for a specific part, which is also called changing the slot assignments, easily by clicking on the selector for that sound in the slot, whether it's slot A, B, C, or D. And that selector is just on the top right corner of that black rectangle where it says the slot letter and what type of sound is there. So that's right here, this little arrow. And so I can pick a bunch of different options here. So I recommend just opening Expand 2 and experimenting with it a bit so you can learn and become familiar with your options in Expand 2. Okay, so now let's talk about Boom. So Boom is another virtual instrument that comes with Pro Tools. It's a drum machine software though, so it's great for any percussion sounds that you might need. Because of this, the designers that made Boom, they modeled it after a drum machine pattern sequencer. So it comes with 10 different drum kits that were inspired by and chosen to mimic some classic electronic drum machines. So to use Boom, you just open up the Boom plugin in your instrument track by clicking on your Inserts panel and selecting Boom from the plugin, just like we discussed earlier. So I'll just show you that really quickly. I'm going to close out of this. And you can go no insert, or you can go straight to picking a different one. So I'm going to go Instrument, Boom. If my computer doesn't freeze. Okay, so then just like with Expand 2, you'll see the window for the Boom interface up here with your Boom options. Again, set to the factory default settings. On the left-hand side of the plugin window, you'll see the matrix display area. And it's the grid-looking section with labels for different parts of a drum kit, so like kick, snare, etc. And it'll have a section with lights that will light up depending on your parameters. So that's this section right here. So where it says kick, snare, blah, 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 crash, and then over this whole section that's lit up here. And this matrix display basically gives you a visual overview of whatever pattern is currently in Boom's sequencer. So it's a great way to work with your drum patterns, and it can help you keep track of what is being played at any given time. If a light is lit up here, then that denotes that the instrument along the y-axis will play at that step in time along the x-axis. So if you look closely, you'll notice that these lights can light up at varying brightnesses or intensities. And this is because the brightness of the light corresponds to the velocity of the instrument trigger. So if the velocity of the trigger is higher, then the light will be brighter. Anyway, in this section, you can add notes to your sequence just by clicking on a light. So I'll just show you that really quickly. I'm just going to click on one of these ones that's not lit up. And it lights up. And now that, what is that? I have to look really carefully here. Ride. It looks like it's the ride that I just clicked. So if you click the same light more than once, it will toggle between velocity values. And it will eventually toggle the note on and off as well. So I can just show you that really quickly. You can see the light intensity change as I click on it. And then it should go off next. And now it's off. And now I can click it back on at full intensity. Okay, so that's all we have for today. But I hope you guys learned some useful information. And next time we'll continue with the virtual instruments that come with Pro Tools by finishing up discussing Boom. And then we will discuss Structure Free. Then we'll finish talking about how to record MIDI in Pro Tools, and we will also cover how to work with MIDI data and clips in a lot more detail once you've actually recorded it to your session. So this will include a discussion of some of the different views when it comes to MIDI. Then, if we still have time, we will return to the details of navigating, selecting, and working in Pro Tools. Anyway, I hope to see you guys here again soon, and thanks for watching Pro Tools Authority.